So it's November, and we're going to check out King Philip's War. And I'm starting out right here on the Memorial Bridge looking at the City of Homes, where 3 garrison houses alone remain after the burning of the city on October 5th, 1675. And I'm at the base of the Pioneer and Colonial Memorial here. This is Memorial Bridge, and each of these pillars has at its base a monument to the various wars of America. And here, right at the top, we see the name of William and John Pension. Let's check out November of 1675. For both sides, the coming winter would be extremely difficult. The settlements in southeastern Massachusetts had been particularly hard hit, while even the hinterlands of Boston had been affected. The English colonies in New England felt that they were under siege. Jeremiads and days of humiliation abounded in the various communities, with ministers banging the table and talking about the dangers of frippery and vanity having afflicted the colonists, visiting God's dreadful judgments down upon them in the form of the native people's attacks. This wasn't so much a problem between they and their Indian neighbors as it was a problem of they and their relationship with the Lord. You can see this in all the primary source writings, from Mather through Rowlandson. Connecticut River settlements were hit hard, with most of their crop fields destroyed, their livestock slaughtered or captured, and many of their communities burnt out. The Valley was lucky to have the energetic Major Appleton, who had spared no opportunity to garrison the surviving communities effectively for the first time, and to avoid the temptation of blind chases into the forests and groves. With the coming of November, the warring sides needed to think about more than just prosecuting their various campaigns against one another. They needed to think about the greatest enemy that faced anyone that lived in New England at the time, the winter. The Battle of Hatfield had showed the native people that the English were starting to learn from earlier mistakes, and those mistakes, which had often been complicated by egos, by dueling colonial loyalties. In the case of the Pioneer Valley, Major Treat and his Connecticut forces, along with his Mohegans, had a hard time following the wishes of someone he didn't consider himself inferior to, John Pension. Now that Pension had been replaced by Appleton, it seemed like maybe there'd be a chance for the two to cooperate more fully, but with rumor of impending attacks on the Connecticut settlements, Treat and his Mohegans had moved south, with the Mohegans heading back to their villages, expecting a long winter ahead of them, and he really doing the same. Major Appleton, new to command, had figured out that the best recipe for the valley would be for garrisons to be established in the surviving settlements, and he allocated 30-something men to Northampton and another 30 to Westfield and another 35 to Hatfield, while Hadley would become the base of operations for the military in the valley, and a giant stockade would be created. Taking a look at the map, you can see how Hadley is located at a site where the Connecticut River makes a great westward curve on its journey to the sea from north to south. That peninsula created offered a perfect site to build a native-style stockade. The native people knew that peninsulas made perfect defensive sites, and the English, following in their tradition, would create 2 great walls, which, if you check it out, remind you, if you know your classical history, of the long walls of Athens. From the northern bend to the southern bend, these walls spanned, and they would be around 400 yards wide by more than 1.5 miles long, and these would be the linchpin for the valley defenses. The train bands, their horses, their cattle could all be quartered safely around the town common inside the walls, and the people of Hadley would be also protected, with all the houses being located inside. Today, if you visit the site, you'll see a marker which, in bronze, commemorates the old stockade, saying, in that way that we say now, safely out of danger, the colonists built these walls to protect them from threat of native attack. These walls were built in the middle of a war, a terrible war, the bloodiest war ever to affect any part of what is now the United States. They built these walls for a reason, and Appleton should be commended for his foresight, his planning, his thoughtfulness. The long walls of Hadley sure must have been a sight to see. So while the walls of Hadley are being created and the forces of the valley are going into defensive positions, the whereabouts of the native people become something we need to speculate on.
After the Battle of Hatfield, it's hard to say exactly where the native people would go. Many, it appears, went north and east of the remains of the settlement at Deerfield, up the Miller's River toward an unnamed war village, clearly a stockade that would be ready in the event of attack by the English. But to attack it, they'd have to discover it. The many tribal people of southern New England weren't deep forest dwellers, as you know if you've watched my channel. They tended to favor river valleys, and they enjoyed fields and modicum of forests that they cleared by burning. Now they'd be reduced to almost a troglodyte lifestyle in the hardwood swamps of the region, where they would establish war villages on peninsulas like the one you see behind me. These war villages weren't well stocked with food because the native people had been on the run throughout the summer months. They'd been unable to plant their own crops, and they'd have to survive on whatever they had taken from English villages they'd attacked. Those of you that have no experience with hunting don't understand that hunting isn't something you do like going to a grocery store. It takes planning and preparation, and it wasn't like the bounty was such that they could just walk around and find whatever they wanted without spending considerable time doing so. The war was having quite an effect as the winter months began. It appears that Philip had taken the Wampanoag people to the northwest with the plan of bringing the Mohican into the war on his side. That would mean he would have to travel to Scaticoke, and there's really nothing between the upper Connecticut River and Scaticoke other than rugged mountains crossed by tumbling rivers. And the journey would be a long one. We won't hear about Philip until December. Muddawump and the Nipmuc would go to ground in the area of Quabbin Reservoir, where war villages abounded. Lots of peninsulas, lots of places where they could melt away, and no English settlement at all had so far penetrated that region.
Somewhere near here, under the shadow of Mount Wachusett, central Massachusetts, Lonely Mountain, the majority of the Nipmucs went to ground for the winter. They had basically assembled their women and children, their elderly, from dozens of tribes, including the river tribes. And probably on a peninsula like the pine-covered one in front of me here, they had constructed a war village. That war village had probably been here since the Tarratine event, but it had been reconstructed, reconfigured, and expanded to contain within it such a huge number of tribal people. While the women and children and seniors sheltered under the slopes of the mountain, which is to their north, protecting them from the worst of the weather. War bands would hit settlements across central and western Massachusetts, and the object would be mills. The native warriors of Philip had shown their excellence in tactics in the woodlands and swamps, regrowing fields and thickets of southern New England. They showed that they understood battlefield tactics, but in the case of the events of the fall and winter of 1675 and early 76, they showed that they also understood strategy. They knew that the colonists needed these mills in order to bring food from the field to the table. And these mills across the area were set upon to the point where many communities put guards on their mills. But in some cases, the guards weren't enough. Such was the state of affairs after the attack on Springfield in October of 1675 that the city was reduced to such ruin that they were forced to go to the site just above me here in Westfield, Massachusetts, to grind their corn at one of Pension's mills. That little grist mill was established by John Pension, the son of William Pension, in 1661. It would help to open up Westfield to settlement by Pension's colonists. And it would be that dam that would lead a group of citizens from Springfield who had witnessed the burning of their city in early October to think that they could get away with getting their milling done here on the edge of the wild. Somewhere along this stream, which meanders down toward Route 20 today, somewhere in this little valley, they were set upon by forces loyal to Philip, Muddawam, and they were killed. The scene of a murder almost 350 years ago. From the southeast to the north shore, central Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, mills would find themselves under attack, and if not, in need of garrisoning. All of this further strained the food resources of the English colonists, and the attacks themselves strained the native people's food resources as well. While 2 generations earlier at Plymouth, members of the now warring communities had sat down to a harvest feast honoring both Great Jehovah and the Great Manitou, now these two sides were hard at war. November was typically a month for slaughtering the livestock that would be put on the table throughout the winter and preserving the meat, making candles, and in the end of the month, feasting. After all, the first Thanksgiving was in effect a great harvest festival between both the native people and the English. Thanksgivings were not only celebrated by the English, but by the tribal people of southern New England as well. Thanksgivings took place all year generally in the form of eat-all ceremonies. The first fish to come up the river, Thanksgiving. The first strawberries picked, Thanksgiving. The first beans, the first corn, the first squash, Thanksgiving. It was relatively common. And in late November, for the native people, this is the great month of hunting, when the buck are in rut. It's easiest to harvest the white-tailed deer. November of 1675, though, wouldn't be an easy one to hunt. The war had caused the consolidation of the various tribes into just a few war villages. The ability to hunt in scattered groups had been curtailed. The numerous natives in these sites led their scent to basically skunk the forests in the area, meaning that it would be a long, hard winter without a lot of available game unless small hunting groups could go out, and that would be dangerous. Native people contented themselves with what we call foraging. They looked for small game that they could catch in snares. Some ice fished. They hunted for various roots like water lily. They dug up ground nuts. They looked for chestnuts and acorns. This is the state of affairs that the native people found themselves in, with their bark roofs over their heads and the howling northeasters of the region. So with frontier settlements and the hinterlands suffering from near starvation, the English colonial leaders of the colonies of Rhode Island, Connecticut, Plymouth, and Massachusetts Bay, met and considered a plan to deal with a tribe that they felt would become hostile if they weren't hostile already, the Narragansetts. The Narragansetts had the temerity of telling the English that they wouldn't hand over any Wampanoags sheltering with them. This couldn't be borne, and the leaders will hatch a plan by which to attack the Narragansetts. And that's what we'll be dealing with in the month of December. Philip moving to the northwest to see if he can get the Mohican people to join him at Scaticoke, and the United Colonies sending out a raid on the Nipmuc fortresses in the Great Swamp in Rhode Island. So I hope you've enjoyed the series so far. There's plenty more coming, with next month being December, which could be considered the decisive month of the war, with Philip on his way to Schaghticoke and the United Colonies expedition against the Narragansetts. This is going to be something. Thanks for joining me, and happy Thanksgiving.